Hey folks, welcome back to CFB Picks. This week we're previewing the playoff matchup between Michigan and TCU. Before we break this one down and dive into the stats, one piece of homework I have for you is to put your picks in the comments and go ahead and also explain why you think one team is going to maybe win this one and punch their ticket to the college football playoff championship game. So diving into things here, we'll start with breaking down Michigan. Not too surprising this year that they had a dominant season, but I think what is maybe a bit more surprising than what a lot of people thought. When you look at their offense, it's definitely improved from last year. But when you look at their defensive stats, if anything, they've gotten better than last year, despite losing some top end talent to the draft. The yards for per game is 22nd best in the country. Pretty good number, especially compared to where some folks might have thought they would be. They underwent a change at quarterback a few weeks into the season, so they rounded out with really good numbers. On the offensive side, yards per pass tied for 23rd. A good number, not an elite number, but yards per rush, tied for 4th in the country. I understand. Blake Corum is down. He's also listed to not partake in this game or the rest of the season, which is definitely a huge blow to this team. But I think it's also notable that their line has definitely helped them with that number. I think, regardless if Corum or Edwards play, I think, they can expect to have great rushing production against just about anyone. Their yards per pass, I think, is really what's been the story, though, down the line. Going into that Ohio State game, I did not preview that one, but I probably would have put it at about maybe Michigan -7 with my pick. I didn't do a formal one to really dive into the stats there, but I probably would have, picked Michigan or Ohio State, plus or -7. I saw that one as a bit of a coin toss from the limited research I did, but I think it was Michigan's line play that really, kind of dictated that game, as their stats, suggest. But we'll discuss that a bit more later in this video. For now, we're going to focus just on Michigan's stats. One that really jumps off the kind of stat sheet here is their explosiveness. They're at a 0.088. So that's just a relationship of how much you're scoring versus how many yards you're putting up over the course of a season. That number, if I'm not mistaken, is the second highest I've seen in my previews. That's second only to Ohio State before they played Michigan. It's a really good number and not really something you think of when you kind of look at Michigan's offense throughout the year. So down the stretch, I think that tells us, they can hit deep balls, hit deep shots, get yardage and, chunks a lot more so than maybe they have, at least in past years, and maybe as their perception kind of leads one to think, playing that Michigan brand of football, which is a lot of, just kind of pounding the rock, run-heavy game, kind of opening up the pass game, and then sort of having a balanced attack, hopefully at the end of the day when things go right. So getting into the schedule, so Michigan, they cap off a perfect season with a 43-22, a dominant win over a good Purdue team, a team that Purdue has that I thought throughout the year was underrated, and they turned out to be pretty solid, all things considered. A couple games I want to focus in on here is their first kind of real struggle, if you will, against Maryland, who has a good offense. They do end up winning that game, but what they also won in that is the turnover ratio. So Michigan actually gave up 2 less turnovers than Maryland in that game, which kind of leads one to think, this was a lot closer than maybe it should have been. When you look at the stats, J.J. McCarthy had a good day. He was, not good, not great day at 18 for 26 and 220 yards. Blake Corum, rushed it for 243 yards. But I think what this number more so says is that, Michigan's, passing defense is something that can be exploited. When you go down the line and look at Ohio State, Yeah, Michigan won that in a blowout fashion, but Stroud still had 349 yards through the air. But I think what really makes things difficult for opponents that play against Michigan is their rush defense. Like I said before, it's tied for second in the country. Yeah, Ohio State, was down their top back, but Mayan Williams is still a great player, and they only, as a team had 143 yards rushing. So as we look at TCU, you want to think, is that something TCU can, match, and then if they want to win this game, do better than moving forward. So getting into the TCU side of things, similarly to Michigan, TCU, with Duggan at quarterback, some elite receiver play, and, a solid run game, the 21st best, offense overall in the country in terms of yardage. The yards against per game, on the other hand, is a bit lacking at 72nd in the country, though their strength of schedule is actually better than Michigan's at 8th. I'm not sure I completely buy that number. I get this number from DraftKings. I don't do my own strength of schedule compilation. I think they have a good strength of schedule. I don't know that it's better than Michigan's. Though, you can look at it and say, yeah, Michigan had a pretty weak out-of-conference schedule. TCU's, though, arguably, not much better. So just a couple things to consider there. Similarly to Michigan, they have good yards per rush average at 5.3. That's 11th best in the country. The yards per pass at 8.4 is a good, not elite number. The yards against per pass is tied for 35th, still a good value. And then the number that I think needs to be brought up and paid attention to as we look at this matchup is their yards against per rush. At 4.2 yards per rush, 4.2 may not sound like a lot, but, at 3 attempts, to move the chains in a given set of downs, more often than not, opponents are going to move the ball. Also, looking at TCU's, advanced stats, their explosiveness is just behind Michigan at a .085. So, as we saw in the conference championship game the last time they played, they're able to hit big plays when they need it, have it be, Duggan running it, or, finding open receivers to move the ball, when they really have to. I do have questions about their depth at the receiver position compared to Michigan, but nonetheless, they can certainly hit big plays when they need to, just like Michigan does. So overall, they have a very robust offense on both sides of the ball, and then the defense, in terms of their pass defense is solid. Their rush defense is, merely average. So getting into TCU's schedule this year, they suffer that, double overtime loss against Kansas State after beating them earlier in the year. The first game I want to focus on, though, is actually their win against Texas, really kind of a drawn-out slugfest of sorts. And the reason I want to focus in on this one is because I think this is similar to what they can expect the Michigan, rushing attack to look like. I understand Donovan Edwards is not Bijan Robinson, but I think they're going to have a rush-heavy attack moving forward. Looking at Michigan's stats, they're averaging 43 rushes per game to 25 passes, so you're going to expect a rush-heavy attack, I think, from the Wolverines in this one. So getting back to that Texas game for TCU here, they didn't give up a ton of yards. They had, gave up 28 total yards, which shows us that, so not a lot at all. So it shows us they can have an elite defense. And their average, Texas' average, meanwhile, is 123 rush yards against per game. TCU went for 159 against a good Texas defense. They have guys like Overshone who are going to be, pretty good. At least early to mid round draft picks, if I had to take a guess, without really diving into the stats for the sake of this video. In their other games, in that loss to Kansas State, they gave up 199 yards through the air. But they also, passed for 251. Kansas State, though, where that was kind of, the backbreaker, if you will, for TCU, is they put up, 218 yards on the ground, or 205 yards on the ground. Meanwhile, they put up 218 of their own. I think it's worth noting, though, that of that 218 TCU put up, 110 came from Duggan on, chump plays. So I think there's concerns to be had if that's, something that can be repeated against a really high-level rush defense such as Michigan in this game. So one other thing I do want to point out is, like I said earlier, I think Michigan, if they have a weakness, it's their passing defense. Duggan, he's shown he can, throw the ball well, 327 yards just through the air against Baylor. It was a pretty solid team this year. Definitely not elite, but, solid. So I think there's something to be said for their passing attack headed into this one that I think, is something TCU can lean on as they enter this game. So speaking of this game, right now, Vegas has it at a 7.5 point spread in favor of Michigan. The model right now has this at 35.6 to 24.2 in favor of Michigan, so a good bit bigger gap there than the spread Vegas is projecting. Right now, our modeled stats for this game are the pass against per play. So we have Michigan giving up 11.62 per attempt. TCU only giving up 7.3. The projected yards per pass, though, here are 9.15 for Michigan and 6.21 for TCU. The other numbers I want to throw in here are the projected rushing yards. Michigan's at 3.4, while TCU's at 2.2. So there's definitely a difference there. Kind of as I said before, I think this game hinges on, Michigan's ability to control both lines of scrimmage or lack thereof. I think if Michigan can either stop TCU's rushing attack, making them one-dimensional, or really prove once again that they can, have a high-level rushing offense against a good defense, which TCU has, and I think Michigan will be in a good spot to win this one. For TCU, in order to win this game, I think the stats kind of tell the story. They need to have a really good game through the air. My pick is a good bit off of Vegas for a couple of reasons. First, we know Michigan's going to have Edwards, and he's probably going to be in a little bit better shape with, almost a month off here to rest. And the other thing with Michigan is, kind of as I alluded to earlier in the video, I think a lot of folks, including myself, picked games Michigan played against, good rush defenses like against Penn State and Ohio State as, 7 to 14 point spread games, and they ended up being way more. And I think that just speaks to how good Michigan's line play is, even against, very good rush defenses. So the question becomes when they play, a good rush defense in TCU who's, they come close, in their efficiency defensively to, teams like Ohio State and Penn State. I still think, when they're, tied for 35th in the country, so really not all that close to especially Penn State, what's going to give. And that's where I think Michigan kind of opens up this game, is I think they're going to find consistency in the run game. Meanwhile, I think TCU's explosive pass game is going to be what kind of merely keeps them in this one. I'm going to be curious to see how that matchup plays out between Michigan's cornerbacks and TCU's receivers. I have concerns with TCU's depth at receiver, so I think that's going to be something to watch. I think just looking at both teams, I think Michigan right now has a little bit more depth at corner than I think TCU has at receiver. Though you can also look at it the other way and say, TCU maybe has a little bit better, maybe a more experienced quarterback in this one. When you look back here at the, passing stats, so, Michigan 8.2 and then TCU at, 8.4, it's pretty even. So I don't see that being where this game really breaks, especially given, both teams have pretty solid pass defenses. Which leads me to once again say, my major concern is that rush defense for TCU. if they're giving up 4.2 yards per rush against their schedule, Michigan, I think, is a good bit better on the ground than most of the teams they've played. So, if Michigan's going for, well over the projected of 3.4, which I think they will do. I think that number is going to be a lot closer to 5.5. Then I think this could become, somewhat lopsided later in the game, especially if TCU's passing game can't, keep up with Michigan here. So in summary, I really think that, kind of as I alluded to in my previous pick for Ohio State and Georgia, I think this one comes down to, who has the easier path to victory. I think if TCU comes out, throwing dimes, they're going to stay in this one and potentially win it. But I think Michigan's, kind of rushing the ball, given Edwards is reasonably healthy, as he looked in the last couple games of the year. I think it's just a much more viable way to get a win out of this one, and that being for Michigan. Rushing the ball and using that elite line play to kind of carry them as it has against elite competition, rather than TCU, trying to get, chunk plays through the air or running Duggan. Duggan is a total weapon when it comes to, being a dual threat quarterback, but I just don't know how that's going to pan out against, the number 2 rush defense in the country. So with that being said, put your picks in the comments. Give a thumbs up if you liked what you heard. And happy bowl season. Have a great week.